Hello and welcome to For Future Generations, episode 4 of the special episodes on the ARP statement. We are very, you know, this has really gone on for longer than I expected. There's been more to dig up than I anticipated at first, and we're really appreciative of the people who've come along to look through this with us. And we're joined as always, by my co-host Sean. I'm Jeff Waugh, and special guest, Pastor Michael Spangler. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. And I will add that, as you know, I have my own podcast with Cody Justice. And we thought, well, we should probably deal with that ARP statement. And I saw that you guys were doing it. And I thought, phew. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on, and I'll offer you what help I can.
One
Thank you
less
for having
thing,
me.
one less thing on your plate. Hey, we're glad to be able to help out that way. And for those who are interested, the links to Michael Spangler's podcast that he does with Cody and his website, his links, and the link to his book will be in the description below. So please peruse that. Click those links, follow those. We're not getting paid. We're just doing it for the love of the game. But Pastor Spangler, we're very glad to have you. Now, by way of introduction, a lot of people might be saying, "Who is Michael Spangler? Where does he come from? What's his shtick?" Pastor Spangler, you are obviously you are a pastor of Piedmont Presbytery Church. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that I mean, for those of you who don't know, it's now a micro denomination. Is that right? At first you were in the ARP, you were removed from the ARP, came over to this church here, and now you've started your own denomination. Is that right? Could you tell us a little bit about how that's gone?
Yeah, so my family never really joined the ARP, though we were most recently attending the ARP. I was a member of the OPC, my family of the Free Church of Scotland, continuing all in various places around here in North Carolina where we live. But sadly, there was an ARP church that I and others were attending, and there was a sad division in the church. But out of it came the beginning of our church, Piedmont Presbyterian, and I'm pleased at how the Lord has blessed us over about a year and a half now. The Lord's been very kind, and as you mentioned, we've been able to have some growth not only in the local church, but adding now another minister to what is now the Southern Presbytery, and that's Reverend Samuel Ketchum. And I'm very thankful for him, and we've appointed him as a church planter with the hope that he'll be able to plant the second church in our presbytery. So we'll see what the Lord will do, but we're praying eagerly, and he's been very kind to establish us here.
Yeah, and this was his post on Twitter about that. It was my privilege, along with Reverend Michael Spangler, to constitute the Southern Presbytery today. And here's a picture of these two wonderful Chads. So we're excited to see what's going on here. Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So we're hoping that good things come of this. And but in the meantime, we have this kinism paper, and for those of you who might be dropping in, this might be your first understanding, or first you've heard of it. Maybe you're here because you see the name Michael Spangler, so you know who he is, but you're not familiar with the ARP. ARP is a Presbyterian denomination, and they have a General Assembly going on, I believe, right now while we're speaking. But it was either this last weekend or it's coming up this weekend, where they will adopt certain positions that are proposed to the body. And this is one of those papers that was proposed, and it is called, the Statement on Race, Kinism, and Race Realism. And this is part 4. If you've not seen the previous 3 parts, there's a playlist on YouTube that will be linked below where you can watch them in order. But we went through first the definitions, and then some of the false attributions that were made early on, and then also some of the misunderstandings and miscommunications that seem to plague this paper entirely. But we wanted to pick up where we have left off, which is on page 7. Now, page 7 out of just short of 30 pages. So we're only about a third of the way through. But there are large swaths of this paper that can, be succinctly tidied away. Whereas these premises, these primary pages in this paper, upon which the entire thing is quite flimsily built. This is where the meat and the potatoes of this paper really are. So, Pastor Spangler, we wanted to pick up on page 7 and just go through this, paragraph by paragraph. And right away, here we go. First paragraph in this subsection, clearing away the debris. Who do we have mentioned but Michael Spangler? Says, in his own retelling of the history, Michael Spangler, in his book Christian Race Realism, makes much of the Southern theologian James Henry Thornwell and Robert Louis Dabney. Others within the movement have cited writers such as Rousseau's John Rushdoony and Episcopal priest T. Robert Ingram. Part of the problem in ascertaining the real history around kinism and race realism is trusting sources and those who cite them. Kind of ironic coming from you, my guy. But back to it. For example, Mark Rushdoony, son of R.J. Rushdoony, has written extensively against the use of his father as a proto-kinist. Similarly, some have tried to clarify that Thornwell and Dabney argued in order to separate them from the modern attempt to co-opt Southern Presbyterianism for contemporary racial politics. So, taking that just first off, Pastor Spangler, you have a book, Christian Race Realism, and I have ordered it. It has not yet arrived. I have not read it, but as you were telling me earlier, it is essentially a compendium of your thoughts that you have already written on your blog. Is that not right?
Yes. So the Pactum Institute is where I published these articles first on Christian race realism, and they've been turned into a book with Sacra Press. The book and the articles are basically the same. So if you've read one, you've read the other. We wanted to have it available in both mediums.
Right, and that's actually not uncommon. For instance, Dr. James White has multiple books that he has produced, several of which I've read. What every Christian needs to know about the Quran, as well as the Forgotten Trinity. And one of the things I realized when I was reading these books is this is essentially just the writing down of his daily podcast. If you've listened to his podcast on the Trinity or on Islam, you will know what's in these books. But it was still a very valuable thing to have handy so that those things that you've heard, you've got a written record of it. You can reference it. You can share it with people. It's a very handy thing to have. So definitely looking forward to that. But he talks about, in your book, the theologians James Henry Thornwell and Robert Louis Dabney, much made about them. And then he proceeds to tell us, well, actually, let me tip my fedora. So Pastor Spangler, if you could, just give us a brief rundown on who James Thornwell and Robert Dabney are.
So James Thornwell was one of the premier, if not the greatest, of the theologians of the Southern Presbyterian Church. He lived in the first half, mostly of the 19th century, and was a very sharp mind and well worth reading. Robert Dabney lived through the second half of the 18th century, also a brilliant man and quite fiery and zealous. And he particularly was able, after the war, to be able to witness against the triumph of egalitarianism, of abolitionism, of Jacobinism, or red republicanism, as he called it. But the same witness was made by Thornwell also. I think one of the greatest blessings of these Southern Presbyterians to the whole church is that they came face to face with the power of modern egalitarianism, recognize it as the threat to Christianity and to civilization that it truly was, and dealt with it manfully as such. And this, of course, is inseparable from the cause of the war for Southern independence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Right.
definitely
And
appreciate you calling it that on our podcast, because we get a lot of hate, yeah, on that. I just wanted to make sure that, to be clear, when you talk about Dabney, he was in the second half of the 19th century.
Oh, did I say another?
You said 18th, yeah. I do that too, but
sorry.
Just want to make sure that people
it's a
know.
very common mistake. The way the centuries are numbered is a little bit confusing.
It's late, excuse me. Both 19th century Southern Presbyterians. Dabney lived just to the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not an avid reader of Thornwell, not because I don't like him or anything like that. Just I'm not familiar with him, haven't really heard that much about him. But definitely a Dabney appreciator. I've got a few Dabney books. This is the one I recommend to everybody. It is a little, it's got some words. It's a little bit of a read, but you could knock this out in 2 weeks, reading a decent section every single day. It's not unapproachable. And Dabney is also very readable. He's not confusing, and he's not like modern theologians or philosophers where he'll use hoity-toity verbiage to try and confuse his audience and make himself sound intelligent. He will speak to the common man in a way that he can be understood, and he's speaking about things that you are seeing in your everyday life that you will understand. It's not confusing. So highly recommend that. But that's a little bit of a teaser, because this book is referenced, and we're going to talk about that. But continuing on to the statement from the ARP here. Let's go back up to where we were. So we've got this first paragraph, and he says, others within the movement have cited writers such as R.J. Rushdoony and the Episcopal priest T. Robert Ingram. Now, most of us are familiar with Rushdoony. I mean, most of us, I think, would probably be more familiar with his readings on theonomy. That's really his claim to fame. Christian reconstruction, the idea that, our moral laws, our laws should follow the laws as written in the Old Testament. Very admirable work there. Not everybody agrees with all of his takes all the time. And unfortunately, the theonomic movement has been plagued with a lot of infighting and backbiting. But he's going to have some thoughts about that. But the Episcopal priest T. Robert Ingram is a new one to me. Pastor Spangler, are you familiar with this gentleman?
I'm not. This article was the first I'd read his name.
Yeah, and in the links down at the bottom, there's not really anything about him, but we do have some writings from Perry Wilkins on Rushdoony's kinism, faith and heritage. There's a link there, and then there's later some links from Mark Rushdoony, Rushdoony's son, explaining some of his ideas. And I'm just going to say right out the gate, I don't think that the writings of Mark Rushdoony say the things that this paper is trying to make him say, and we'll cover that a little more when we get there. But
can I real quick?
Go ahead.
So you had mentioned, Pastor Spangler, that you're not familiar with T. Robert Ingram. That seems to be because the way that it's put in this paper, others within the movement have cited writers such as whoever, right? So there's a lot of names that keep getting thrown out as this guy is a source in this movement, or this guy literally wrote a paper quoting this guy, and it's just made up out of thin air. So I'm curious to see if any of the 4 or 5 people named by name in this document know who that is or have used him as a source. What is I see it's got a footnote 10. We know that the footnotes have been trustworthy in this. What does footnote 10 say there?
So footnote 10, we scroll down to that. Perry Wilkins' Rushdoony's Kinism, which is a Faith and Heritage article, and there's a link to it. And then Ed T. Robert Ingram, Essays on Segregation. Thomas Press, 1960, page 84, quoted in The Battle for the Soul of Reconstructionism, Kinism versus Alienism, which is Faith and Heritage again. And, you know, I have not had the time to look up all of these, but we can quickly just drop this link and see if it goes anywhere, because several times we've seen things like this. But there it follows to a link. When I type in the link, it drops us halfway down the page. Not really sure why, but you know, you can see the word Rushdoony
To the footnote. It brought you right to the footnote.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, full disclosure, I've not read this article. Let's scroll to the top. But this is by Ehud Wood, which is, of course, a nom de jour for some fellow writing at Faith and Heritage. So we don't know who this is. But if we wanted to just quickly look up the name, let's see. Let's look up the name Ingram and just see. Okay, here we go. So he's quoted about in the first couple paragraphs. H.B. Clark, author of Biblical Law. T. Robert Ingram, who penned the World Under God's Law. And then we've got again here. Mostly he's being referenced but not really quoted. Ingram's case against the secular humanists applies equally to neo-theonomists. I mean, this seems like a very niche article. I'm not familiar with the writer, and I'm not familiar with his argumentation, but Ingram is referenced, you know, three or four times, but still not heavily. I mean, this is somebody most of us have never heard of. But
they're saying Perry Wilkins is the guy who wrote the article, so that must be his real name.
Maybe so. This could be an instance of doxing, but the first link is to this one here. So he might be the author of the first one, but not the second one. But anyway, not really too sure about who this is, but we will not. We don't know who it is, but we will neither confirm nor deny. You know, we're not in the business of doxing friends. We're not in the business of disavowing people. So we'll just let that one stand. So continuing on, part of the problem is ascertaining the real history around kinism and race realism is trusting sources and those who cite them. Now, Sean, do we have some thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's it's been interesting. I guess this is a good time to bring up the since he wants to go there. You know, I listened to a thing on Presbycast, I believe is what it was called. It was put out like 2 weeks ago. So seemingly the timeline, it was that maybe it's 3 weeks now, but the timeline was that after Audie had called them out to their faces, going straight to the heads of the denomination and saying, hey, this guy is saying that I wrote something that I didn't write. He just made up an art. I don't know if Pastor Spangler, if you're familiar with that whole debacle, but they basically just said that Audie wrote an article that has never existed. It was completely made up. And since then, the author of the document, Ben Glaser, has come out and been like, no, we have not used AI on this, which was kind of
vehemently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of our way of kind of giving him a break. Like, okay, dude, you got caught using AI, but instead he's saying the only other option is somebody wrote by hand a fake article, a fake citation to a fake article that has never existed. So it wasn't just a misattribution. And that was our whole second episode, basically. And basically he came out on that Presbycast podcast and was saying, well, you know, like there's a lot of people that wrote this, and then these people like to delete a lot of citations, or they delete a lot of what they post. And so that seemed to be kind of his way of saying, well, there used to be something there and then they got rid of it. Well, if that's the case, I mean, we saw that they know how to use the Wayback Machine. They've used it in other footnotes that they have for articles that no longer exist, but did at one time. And so they were able to say, well, this article was published on, this year, whatever, and they cited that properly. But suddenly this article that no one's ever heard of, we can't, they deleted it. They scrubbed it. So he's got numerous excuses that he's kind of going back and forth with on his citations. And so somebody had posted, I didn't know that existed until this week. And so I finally listened to that, and it was just very, it was a lot of just high-fiving each other. Yay, we did this. Nah, look at us.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, talking about the credibility of sources and those who cite them, this fictional article that was cited in the way and method in which it was cited would have gone to a page within the website that has never existed, because the format, the URL format of the link said, pactuminstitute.com/articles/name of the article, separated by hyphens and all that. But that page, Pactum Institute/articles or whatever it was, that's not the way the website is formatted, nor ever was formatted. That is not a real page. It has never been a real page. And unless they rebuilt the website from the ground up, will never be a real page. So for them to first off cite a non-existent article, then say, oh, well, it was deleted later and we never used AI. That is self-damnation. You are making yourself
he never said the specific one, right? So I'm taking what he said generally. Oh, these Kenneth, whatever, they like to delete articles and stuff, so it's kind of hard finding. So, and he said that in the context of we had to clean up, we had to clean up some of our footnotes, but in reality, they deleted like a third of them or some crazy amount. So what we're going through right now is actually the edited after we called them out on what they had to say.
But not the final version, actually. They have another final version, which I do not have. So, I mean, there are multiple versions of this at this point.
So what bothers me, and I know this is kind of recapping, but, Pastor Spangler, you're someone named by name in a document that is intended to prove to everyone that you will be separated from Christ for all eternity. That's the point of the document, right? Like, that's it. They want to kick you out of the visible church. And so for them to just, first of all, lie, they got caught in a lie. They haven't admitted it. They haven't just said sorry. And then for it to just be like, they keep revising it. Like, you didn't get this airtight before condemning people to hell. Like, that's so insane to me that they just threw it out there like that. So first of all, I'm sorry that you're having to go through. I know that you and I don't actually care what these people think, but it's still not the best feeling in the world for someone to, almost use a naughty word, but not wholeheartedly put their effort into making a good article when they're talking about your soul and your spiritual standing before God. It's insane. So,
it is a mercy of God when our enemies are stupid.
Yeah.
It does help. And God is just in that way. And I believe we see his judgments and that he gives men over to total folly so that everyone can see it, but it seems themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and all their sycophantic friends at the synod, unfortunately. But they will beclown themselves yet further, I'm sure. So getting back to this page here, we were talking about the problems of people and the citations and those who cite them. For example, Mark Rushdoony, son of R.J. Rushdoony, written extensively against the use of his father as a proto-kinist. The link here goes to a page understanding R.J. Rushdoony. Now, that page is an article about racism, and he goes through here. I mean, it's not a long blog post, but I won't spend the time to read it. But nothing that Mr. Mark Rushdoony here says about his father is in contradiction to anything that I believe Pastor Spangler, Pastor McAtee, or Brother Schlebusch would hold. He is talking about interracial marriage and intercultural, and just laying down the fact that his father, R.J. Rushdoony, was, shall we say, not a fan. Said that they come with inherent problems that should be recognized and dealt with. So this footnote is not saying what you think it does. And then the video, I've listened to it twice now. He's not talking about kinism. Mark Rushdoony does not reference kinism in the video at all. That is not the point of the video. The video is talking about Rushdoony and his views and the things that he taught. And the things that R.J. Rushdoony, and by extension Mark Rushdoony, believe and teach are condemned by this paper. So I don't know why you're trying to use him as kind of a bolster for your side, taking him out of context as if he's somehow on your side of these issues, because I'm afraid, if we go up to the very beginning on these definitions on page 3, I believe it is, where or page 2, where we start talking about, what does kinism and race realism mean? By all definitions, R.J. Rushdoony would very easily and comfortably, as well as Mark Rushdoony, would easily and comfortably fit within your definition of kinism. So, not sure why he's cited here. Not sure what you're trying to do here, because you don't even really make a statement.
Hey, Jeff, do you remember which one of those definitions were directly tied to Pastor Spangler here, if either? Because that was one of the things that I wanted to...
Yeah, so when we go to the definitions on page 2, the references go to kinism.net and Pactum Institute, and specifically on Pactum Institute, Christian Race Realism, and several links that have been kind of defined down to one. But
yes, those are my articles.
Mm-hmm.
That's
okay.
That's
so wait, was that the kinism definition or the race realism one?
That would have been the race realism one.
Okay. Do we want to go through that now? Because that's one of the main things that I wanted to talk about today, is that because I mean, you and I were like, what is going on with this definition? Like, is it quoted? Because it's infamously doesn't have quotation marks.
Those are not quotes.
Right. So if we could go through that definition and just kind of get your take on how you feel about that. Do you feel it's an accurate representation of...
So how about I read it, and then we just get your commentary on if you feel like this is a good representation, a good summary of your writings for the Pactum Institute. So it says race realism. This is on the definitions on page 2, says race realism, the doctrine that differences in human races extend beyond simply geography, appearance, and ancestry. Racial differences also include differences in virtues and vices, intelligence, a tendency to rule or be ruled, and a propensity toward different gods and religions. These racial distinctions are not just real, but but immutably set and maintained by God. This means certain boundaries ought not to be crossed, including mixed race marriages, mixed race schools, and mixed race churches. It also means racial slavery, racial segregation, and intentionally exclusive white leadership can be biblical and good.
Yes, I'd say that all sounds familiar. There are places where my articles or book are more carefully explained.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize this as an effort to summarize what I said. I do recognize it as a hostile effort to summarize. I would myself not put everything this way, but if someone else said these things who meant well, I would defend him in it. Just one
Could we get
example is this word immutably set and maintained by God. I talk about the reality of change in race, just that the races typically change very slowly. They're practically immutable in our lifetimes. And I leave open the idea that God could change races faster than we know. Regarding religion, it is true that races all tend to have their own religions. The word Hindu, for example, can be in the past a racial or a religious term.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe Christ is conquering the nations, and I expect that even the Hindus won't be Hindu one day. So we hope and expect certain changes in the races, but those things, especially in religion, would be a miracle of grace and not according to the normal order of things now. And we don't make judgments about races based on miracles that may happen one day. Practically, they are immutable. So I take some time explaining that. So immutably, yeah, I'm willing to accept that as a summary. Just know that I said more than just that word. The rest, it means racial slavery, racial segregation, intentionally white leadership can be biblical and good. Well, that word can,
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
I certainly believe that, and I don't have any problem with racial slavery, racial segregation, intentionally exclusive white leadership. I mean, the whole sum of my practical conclusion is the word segregation. God made the races distinct or segregated, and we're to live accordingly. So certain boundaries ought not to be crossed, including mixed race marriages, mixed race schools, and mixed race churches. And in general, yes, that's what I say.
And again, the word ought is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
I guess
there is a moral imperative not to, I would say, unduly mix the races. That doesn't mean that there are not ways the races can interact. It doesn't mean that everything we would call mixed race marriage is always sinful. I recognize biblical exceptions and their reasons. That doesn't mean that every school has to be segregated or every church, but I do try to offer some wise principles for thinking through the how and the why of segregation. The segregation, generally speaking, is a good thing because it keeps separate what God has made separate and doesn't mix things that he has not intended to mix. But the actual outworking of it in the complicated circumstances of life takes great prudence and wisdom. And that prudence can't be summarized in just a sentence.
Yeah, in just one paragraph of 4 very brief sentences. Yeah, and the other thing too is when you look at it, I mean, like I said, the word can be and the word ought, these words here, essentially what they're doing is they're setting up these separations, these distinctions as Chesterton's fence. And the parable of Chesterton's fence, for those who don't know, is, if you're in the countryside and you find a fence, you don't remove the fence until you know why it was there. Well, the logical conclusion is if you know why it's there, if you're willing to accept the risk and the consequences, you ultimately can remove that fence. But you just need to go into it with your eyes wide open. The idea that these certain boundaries ought not to be crossed, that doesn't mean that there aren't instances where they will be, where it will be necessary, or it will sometimes be the best of a bad situation. We see this often in persecution. Certain groups will come together that were never together before, and good and bad things come out of that. But God causes things to happen in this fallen world, and we have to go into it with our eyes wide open, not just blindly doing whatever feels good in the moment like it's the 1960s.
Yeah, and please stop me if what I'm about to do is watering down what you really believe, because I basically I'm trying to like sum up, because some of these, like what you've just said, hits my ears as, well, that's so completely obvious and innocent, and there's no way that that's sin, right? But to men of lesser character, they might hear that and just assume the worst. So I'm going to try to summarize a couple of things that from the, and tell me if I'm even getting it right. So this first line, I remember Jeff and I in our first episode, really, my big thing with this first line, that differences in human races extend beyond simply geography, appearance, and ancestry. I had noted, well, nothing's beyond ancestry. Like, all of those things are downstream of ancestry.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. It's a mistake, but I've seen there are plenty of mistakes and problems with wording and just poor choice of words.
When they say racial differences also include differences in virtues and vices, intelligence, and tendency to rule or be ruled, and a propensity towards different gods and religions. That's basically just saying that not all races are the same.
Yeah, and these
That's,
differences do exist in these things. I think they're intending this to show off how evil men like me are, but it's just a matter of common sense that races are different in all of these matters. I don't know who is honest and who disagrees with this. People don't like it, and so they'll deny it because they don't want it to be so. But their problem is with God, who made this to be so, who did not make all men equal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You already addressed the immutably set and maintained by God thing. They seem to believe, I say they, the people writing this statement, and everyone agrees with it, this idea that you and I and Jeff and everyone, we all believe that like black people are always going to live at a Stone Age level because that's, where the white man found them hundreds of years ago.
Thousands of years ago.
But,
1,000.
well, no, I'm just,
yeah.
But you would even address, like, races change over time slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not the example I gave is that you're not just going to show up to a bunch of people living at a Stone Age level and then give them the gospel, and suddenly they're like, I should build a McDonald's instead of, eating mud cakes or whatever things that they're eating.
And there will be a natural limit on the place of some races within civilization, even when they do receive its blessings. I mean, you see that in the American South. Our slaves were very civilized, but it was because of their subordination to us. When they left that and were emancipated, since then it has been a downward spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A reversion to the mean, one might say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, we're talking about certain boundaries ought not to be crossed. So we already said ought not is doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? We're saying, hey, it's bad practice to do this. But would you say mixed race marriage is in itself sin?
I wouldn't say I would make distinctions. It's not in itself sin, as in every case is ipso facto sinful. But in most practical cases, it is sinful. It violates many different principles that prudence should see and say, whoa, we shouldn't do that. I mean, in the case of Africans and Europeans, blacks and whites, it's literally black and white. This is as different as possible. God made our ancestors to live separate lives for many centuries, separated by enormous differences in geography. I mean, the whole Mediterranean Sea, the Sahara Desert, in our case, the Atlantic Ocean. And we need to respect the differences God made and all the terrible results that come from these things. You put all that together, yeah, it's sinful. It would be a sin in any case. I can't think of a single case where it would be wise or good or prudent for a white and a black to marry. So I'm willing to receive this line as a summary, ought not to have mixed race marriages. That's in most cases exactly what I tell people. Don't do that. God did not intend that. This is not good for you. Don't mix what he hasn't mixed. Marry your own people.
So as a follow-up to that, let's say that there was a couple. They were, baby Christians, normie Christians, mixed race, white guy, black girl, black guy, white girl, whatever kind of situation. They are both Christians. They get married, and as as they grow together spiritually, they come to a view similar to the one that you hold. Would you counsel them, in a private counseling, would you counsel them to break up their marriage, or would you counsel them to stay together?
Now, that's a very fancy hypothetical. I have not seen it.
No, and it is, not necessarily something that has happened.
Let me make the hypothetical less fancy. A white man and a black woman come to you. They're already married. Would you ever advise them to divorce?
No, I recognize that there are some who say that they're Kenists, and we agree on many principles, and they use the example of Ezra 10 and say that it applies directly to all such marriages. I would not advise them to divorce. I don't think there is a biblical cause for divorce, which requires either adultery or irremediable desertion. I would try to help them recognize that they made a poor choice, and they need humbly before God to confess that, and then live humbly according to the consequences. There will need to be some prudent dealing with their children and care for them. They've put their children into what is frankly an impossible situation.
Mm-hmm.
They've put enormous burdens on their back, and they need to deal prudently with that. They have caused great harm to both races, but especially to our white race, because interracial marriage by its nature is a weapon to harm whites, and it causes much more harm to us than to others. There's much more I could say about that we would have to speak about. I would say, though, that in cases where legal precedent has been established that these marriages are not valid under law, then them being invalid would mean that they should separate. If I was a pastor in North Carolina before 1967, and our laws against black-white marriage were still in force, and a black-white couple came to me and said, "We're married," I'd say, "No, you're not. And you need to separate now. Your marriage was not lawful in this state, and I am not going to countenance it." That's a different circumstance. And do I think we should restore those laws? Yes, absolutely. What a protection and help it would be to our poor people in their total confusion about racial matters. It would be a great help. And I don't think such marriages should be legal. And when they weren't legal, most of these crazy hypothetical, and in some cases now not so hypothetical, situations just didn't exist. I take Ezra 10 as an example of that very thing, that because these marriages were forbidden in the civil law, that they were therefore not valid.
Okay. So in Ezra 10, when they're putting away their foreign wives, your view on that would be that they were illegitimate marriages from the fact that they were forbidden from the outset.
I think so. I'm willing to study more on that. I admit there are a number of difficulties that require more thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's not to say that we've got everything figured out. I mean, we live in an upside down world. There's a lot of things that are intentionally made very confusing, and it's not going to be easy to find our way out of this. Yeah. But for those who maybe aren't familiar with the story, Pastor Spangler, do you want to give a little bit of an example of what happened in Ezra 10? What is the setting for that, the situation that these people found themselves in?
Sure. So in Ezra 9, Ezra himself was very troubled to have found out the people, the holy seed, as they're called, were mixed with the people of the land. which was forbidden, for example, in Deuteronomy 7. And it was a great occasion for idolatry as well, which these people had just been rescued from Babylon, where they had suffered the punishment for the idolatry that the southern kingdom had fallen into. So this is a very serious matter. I'll read Ezra 9:2. For they had taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and the rulers hath been chief in this trespass. And Ezra, properly as a minister of God, becomes a model to the people in mourning for their sins, confessing sin. Ezra 9 is an excellent example of confession of sin, but then not mere prayer and confession, but actually doing something about it. So in chapter 10, the sum is verse 3, now therefore let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and such as are born of them, according to the counsel of my Lord and of those that tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. To me, that gives weight to what I was saying. They recognized that this was a matter of making things right by the civil law that God had given Israel, in which these marriages were forbidden by law.
Yeah. And that's not to say that this was an easy or a fun thing for them to go through. And this would have been a very difficult process, a very painful process.
No, and if you heard in the verse, they
Mhm.
said it needed to be done according to the counsel of my Lord and of those that tremble of the commandment of God. There needed to be godly counsel, because there would be many difficulties. These wives, being dependent on their husbands, couldn't be put in a way that was cruel or inhuman or that would cause them to starve, or there needed to be a proper dealing, but they didn't let the difficulties of doing what is right keep them from doing it.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So the obvious objection that people are going to bring up is going to be that in the New Testament we have similar things being addressed, but you have the situation of a non-believer and a believer. I'm drawing a blank on the exact address of that at the moment, but
yeah, the two passages to go to, one giving the principle of 2 Corinthians 6, be not unequally yoked, what fellowship hath light with darkness, etc. But then more explicitly for marriage, 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is dealing with those who are single. And then he concludes at the end, the wife is bound by law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she is at liberty married to whom she will, only in the Lord. So that applies, this principle of equal yoking, to the question of marriage. And we may, as those in the Lord, only marry to others in the Lord. Christians may not marry non-Christians. But I would note that the general principle given according to the apostles' intent in 2 Corinthians 6, be not unequally yoked, is actually a natural principle. You wouldn't want two oxen that are not well paired to be under the same yoke together. As Amos says, can two walk together and they're not agreed? Well, no. But that has wisdom far beyond spiritual things. I mean, this is a natural principle. I was running this morning with a young kid who visits our church, and he's a lot faster than me, and he had to really slow down for us to run together. If we tried racing, it wouldn't go well. We couldn't walk together. And that's just a very natural thing, but it just illustrates this principle is all throughout life. And when it comes to marriage, in which compatibility by everyone's consent is so important for peace and harmony, why would we ignore that principle in everything but religion and spiritual things? There are some who would go so far as to assert the only thing that matters is spiritual compatibility. And that's just not true. I don't think anyone believes it. It just becomes a trope to try to shut down the Kenneth. I mean, do you really believe you should marry someone who can't speak your language, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think
No,
that?
that's an obvious one. Yeah.
Do you think a 70-year-old should marry a 20-year-old?
No.
You know,
Ooh,
especially if
what?
the 20-year-old is the man.
Yeah, I was going to say it
Well,
makes a
yeah.
difference.
It does. It makes it. But you see,
Yeah.
natural
Mhm.
things, the sex of the
Mhm.
partners
Right.
affects the age difference.
Mhm.
I mean, you see, these are natural things. These things are apart from religion. These are things we'd counsel unbelievers to think about in themselves getting married. And it's
Mhm.
the principle of equal yoking. Paul is adapting a general principle of wisdom to spiritual things, which is wise and good. And then specifically in 1 Corinthians 7 to marriage. But that doesn't mean that we don't have reason to use that same principle to think of non-spiritual things. Marriage is not just a spiritual thing. It actually, first and foremost, is a natural thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so we need to think with natural wisdom regarding it.
Yeah, and there are, like you said, there are lots of boundaries and lots of things to take into consideration before any of these things take place. For instance, if a man is unable to work and provide for a wife and children, should he really be getting married? I mean, this is something that every man has counseled a younger man who is trying to get married. And what is the first question you ask? Do you have a job? Do
Yeah.
you have a
Oh,
car? What is
hey,
your living situation?
but Jeffrey, the way these anti-kinists talk, they'd say, no. The only requirement in Scripture is only in the Lord. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if he doesn't have a job. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have legs and can't work.
But he's so
If he's a
spiritually
Christian,
mature.
it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if he is physically unable to reproduce. Who cares?
Mhm.
Is he a Christian? That's all that matters.
Mhm.
Well, I hope those things illustrate to every thinking person that that's ridiculous. It's
Yeah, because these
ridiculous.
things do matter.
They matter very much. So much so that they can make or break a marriage, even render someone completely unable to get married.
Mhm. Very true.
So I'm not going to spend time like pushing back, but there are things like with what we just said where I'm just not quite there yet.
Go ahead.
So I mean,
I don't
for
mind
when people
pushback.
clip me, I know people are going to clip this and put me in it. Like I'm like all on board, but there's just like little things. So I guess my principle, this is something that got brought up on Twitter today. My big issue with statements like this attacking you, someone I don't fully agree with, but someone who I don't believe is so far different from me that I can't even have fellowship with, right? That I have to just anathematize every time I hear your name, I have to throw salt behind my shoulder, something like that. Whatever weird things people do. But I think my thing is that I personally believe that people ought to be able to live the way that you're talking about wanting to live. And the picture that always comes up in my mind when I think about that is the 101st Airborne sticking bayonets in the backs of students in Arkansas. Not literally like stabbing them, but like, get moving, go to school with the black kids. Like that's the thing I'm against. And then also saying that those who want to live the opposite of that are somehow outside of the Christian faith. Like that part of it is absurd. So like I guess where I would differ is like I wouldn't want the mixed race couple to divorce if they're already married. Right? Like I personally wouldn't want that. Like it would just be, well, you're where you're at. This is the situation in which you live.
Yeah, I should clarify. As I said, I agree with you. Recognizing our present circumstances, their marriage is legal. It is a true marriage between one man and one woman with consent, which is the basic definition of marriage. But I think marriage being a social and political matter, the civil magistrate has a reason to be interested in declaring and forbidding certain types of marriages.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it goes back to that ought situation. Like the law ought to be this way, and if it were that way, we ought to follow it.
Yeah, and this is common American jurisprudence. Nearly all the states had laws against black-white marriage, at least, if not also other mixed-race marriages.
Well, and there are other instances where the law might forbid certain types of marriages. and things that might have nothing to do with race at all. For instance, you might have a man who's on death row going to be hung. He's just waiting for a magistrate or somebody to show up. And then there's, some young lady shows up and she's like, well, Pastor so-and-so and I went and visited so-and-so in his jail cell and he married us. So we're married now. And the magistrate would be fully in his authority to say, no, that is not a legitimate marriage. That is not a licit marriage. This is just something that you did on the spur of your. So there are instances where people can rope themselves into situations where they're trying to get married in ways that are not licit. And the government does have the ability to nullify those marriages, and it always has.
Yes, if I can give it an example that's real, our states have different laws concerning first cousin marriage for a variety of reasons. First cousin marriage is not, according to Scripture, immoral. It is effectively immoral among most of our people who find it just disgusting by habit or custom. But in itself, I can't say that it's immoral. I think it's secondarily immoral because we don't dare violate a good custom. And there are eugenic reasons as well for which it's forbidden in some places. So in a state where cousin marriage is illegal and two first cousins marry anyway, is that a valid marriage? I'm not willing to say it is. I certainly would not, as a minister, be willing to marry them. And if they did get married, I believe I would tell them, I'm sorry, you're living a lie. You need to separate.
Yeah, this is not a licit marriage. This is not a real marriage. Well,
and if they said, well, that marriage is not forbidden in Scripture, I could say that's not the only question here.
Well, and to get to a real life example, when I was a child in Germany, this became international news, actually. There was a German couple who were married for several years. I want to say it was something like 5 years, and discovered that they were unable to have children. So they were going to doctors to try and get fertility treatments and figure out why they were not able to have children. It turned out they found out, unfortunately, that through genetic testing, they were very closely related. And by very closely related, what I mean is they were both adopted as children. They were siblings. They were twins, in fact. And because they were adopted, they were both adopted. They both had the same birthday. They had great similar interests, and they just hit it off when they met, and they got married. And they had a legal marriage by the nation state of Germany. The state of Germany gave them a legal marriage. Well, when they discovered that they were related, the doctors reported to them, hey, it turns out you're married to your twin. This is not a legal marriage. You are not legally allowed to be married to each other. And their marriage was legally annulled without their consent. And they went through the courts to try to maintain their marriage. They said, look, we're not going to try to have children. We just want to live together as husband and wife, as we've done for the last near decade or so, however long it's been. We just want to maintain the status quo. And the state of Germany told them in no uncertain terms, this is not a legal marriage. You are not married to each other. You will stop being legally married to each other. And that was a very difficult thing for them to go through. I mean, that's a horrible tragedy, and obviously something that was not their fault. I mean, maybe they should have done a little more diligence when they discovered that they were both adopted and had the same birthday. Maybe you should look into that a little bit. But there are instances where there will be marriages that take place that are later annulled by the state because they were not licit. They seemed to be perfectly fine in the moment, but after the fact, it was discovered that they were not licit marriages. In the United States, we have had bigamy laws for decades, essentially since the founding of this nation. A man who is already married, who then, shows up in town, marries some sweet young thing, and then they find out, hey, actually, he's already married. That means that this marriage is not licit. So there's a distinction to be made between divorce and annulment. and it is a legal distinction. And I think, to give Pastor Spangler, to give you your due, you're not talking about counseling a legally married interracial couple to divorce. But in certain instances where the legal framework is such that marriage would be illicit, that it would be legally annulled, that is not the same thing. But it requires an entire state apparatus. It requires the will of a people behind it, which, quite frankly, right now does not exist. So things being as they are, you would not counsel an interracial couple to divorce. Am I getting that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So sorry, folks, that's a lot of words, but unfortunately things get very technical and you have to do a little bit of, sometimes you have to flesh things out a little bit before you can see the meat on the bones.
On that note, I just want to point out, like, if people would just have these conversations with you, they would get to the nitty gritty and just be like, oh, okay, well, that actually makes sense. Like, because I came out, I was like, you know what, I'm not willing to go that far. And then we talked a little bit and it's like, oh, actually, okay, I get what you're saying. I don't know why people just won't have these conversations. I had said that, Ben Glaser could have, instead of writing out this document or however, I'll trust him that he wrote the document, right?
And we'll assume.
we will give you the benefit of the doubt that you wrote this document, and then you had to edit where you took at least like a third of the footnotes out. You took all these paragraphs out and blah blah blah. All of that effort could have been saved by just having a conversation with the people who you by name are trying to condemn. And I don't understand that. I just don't get it. I don't know why people they're just so quick. And here was another thing I thought of today was their whole thing is, well, these are divisive. If we allow these people to stay in the church, they'll divide the church. But their whole motif is just kicking people out of the church.
That's very divisive.
Yeah, out of denominations that they're not even a part of. Right? Like
Right.
they're just...
Yeah. They assume that schism can only be in the minority, the fault of the minority.
Yeah.
But that's very often not true.
I mean, if that's true, then Martin Luther, he's definitely the schismatic, whereas he very plainly wrote in his writings that it was the Pope of Rome who was the schismatic.
Right.
But, if the majority always wins, then Protestants shouldn't exist.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's get back into the paper here after this brief aside. We were still in the first paragraph of this clearing away the debris. We were in the last sentence here. Similarly, some have tried to clarify that Thornwell and Dabney argued in order to separate them from the modern attempt to co-opt Southern Presbyterianism for contemporary racial politics.
Yeah.
That is...
Can I address that?
Quite a sentence right there. Yes, sir.
The some have argued, that is slippery academic
First off,
speech.
that is not...
It's just so slippery. Some have argued. So what? Are they right? Who? How many? Is it anyone reputable? Why don't you just say what you think rather than what some have argued? And it suggests that we are the ones twisting the Southern Presbyterians. But it doesn't actually say it. It says someone else might have said it. So there's plausible deniability when it turns out that we're actually the ones using the Southern Presbyterians correctly. I mean, this is just so deceitful, this way of talking.
I mean, it really is yellow journalism. I mean, it brings to mind to me, I mean, I'm a political nerd, but there was an interview about maybe 2 years ago or so where Pierre Poilievre, who is a conservative candidate running for the premiership of Canada, whatever they call their president office. And, he's the leader of the Conservative Party. And he's in an interview with, the CBC, I believe it is, which is, the Canadian broadcast company. And the journalist asked him, some people say that your rhetoric is very much like Trump's. And of course, they're trying to smear him with this because Trump is very unpopular in Canada, even to this day. And he says, "Who says that?" And the journalist says, well, people, some people just notice. He says, "So who says that?" "Well, people say that." "Well, you're saying that." And Pierre hammers him. He's like, "Well, you're the one saying it. All right. So why don't you just say it? Why do you have to say some people say?" And it's also reminiscent of an interview where the highwaymen, Johnny Cash and the others, the highwaymen, they're being interviewed by some smarmy journalist, and he says, "Some people say that y'all got together because you can't sell out a full auditorium by yourself." And they absolutely just hammer on him because they're saying, "Well, who says that? You're saying that. That's not some people say. You're saying that." And that's what's going on here is the author, the alleged author of this paper, does not have the cojones, does not have the spine to come out and say something himself. So he's going to say, "Some have tried to clarify," and then he's going to put a footnote that goes down to here to a book, "For what James Henry Thornwell believes, see," and then he references their own books. He's not referencing somebody writing about what they believe. He's just saying, "Some people say they don't believe that. Here are their books. Just see for yourself." That is not reputable. Getting back to
Well, then he cites two contemporary men on the question of the spirituality of the church, which is important and related. But that book he cited by Thornwell, oh, you should read it. It is
The Rights and Duties of Masters.
A very strident rejection of abolitionism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is nailing this modern spirit that the abolitionists had of egalitarianism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not somebody that I think Glaser would actually be able to honestly reference for his own side. And it really does harken back to that previous sentence, and I know we've hammered on it before. Part of the problem in ascertaining the real history around anti-kinism and race unrealism is trusting the sources and those who cite them. Because Mr. Glaser and whatever friends you used, real and imaginary, to help you compile this, this is ridiculous. But any more commentary on that before we continue?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, did you note, are there sections in here where he's like showing actual Dabney quotes, and then, because he does this a lot where he'll be like, "Oh, to read about this, read this work," which isn't actually citing anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
so
saying,
for instance,
this exists.
For what James Henley Thornwell believes, see Rights and Duties of Masters,
right?
Page 5 to 51.
He could quote almost any page of that document, and it would burn a hole in his report here.
Yeah.
Well, but it's like if I said, well, the Bible says, for reference, look up Genesis 1 through Revelation 22. Like, okay, no, tell me where exactly, because I know Jeff and I in kind of backroom discussions that we've had, we were like, what kind of page numbering was he using when he quoted this, because the page doesn't say anything about what he's talking about. So I would like, when you do revision 73 of your document, put some actual quotes in it. How about that? Because I have no idea what he's referencing most of the time. He cites Defense of Virginia, and he doesn't say what edition he has. It just says,
I want to cover that when we get to it,
okay.
Because
okay.
I've got
tonight,
the goods.
Or
we might touch on that right after we get to this next bit, because there is another reference here that I think is just absolutely bizarre. So with your permission, Pastor Spangler, I'll just move on to the next paragraph. Sure. And this is something that you will hear a lot It is common in kinist race realism circles to hear someone say something like, quote, everyone prior to 1970 agreed with insert kinist race realist idea here, end quote. There is a reason it is common to hear that, because it's true. All right, so let's hear him absolutely demolish this quote. All right, so he says it is common for people to say. He doesn't give any references, but we'll just take him at his word. It's common to hear people say. Then he says, generally speaking, the historical timeline of kinism and race realism can be summarized in this way. Prior to the Reconquista in the 15th and 16th centuries, the concept of an immutability of race was foreign to philosophy, science, and theology. Reference number 13. The Greeks believed a Scythian could move to Athens and lose his Scythianness. Reference 14. Arguments in favor of a kinist race realism view begin to appear in response to scientific discoveries of men like Carl Linnaeus. No reference.
Carl Linnaeus.
Carl Linnaeus. Yeah, guys, the idea of race is found in Genesis, and Carl Linnaeus lived in the 1800s or the 1700s, if I'm remembering correct. I believe it was right around the turn of those centuries. But first off, I want to go into these references. So 13 and 14. Max S. Herring Torres, Purity of Blood, Exclusion, Demarcation, and Gradation in The Origins of Racism in the West. And 14 is Renate Roll, The World of the Scythians. Now, I have not read The World of the Scythians, but it sounds like a very interesting book. But I looked up this Max S. Herring Torres, and Pastor Spangler, I know you don't appreciate language of a certain nature, so I will tame it. But this guy is a poop lib. Okay, this guy is not somebody who should be being referenced in a serious right-wing, theologically Christian document. I cannot get my hands on his stuff because it all costs money. So I cannot read the quotes from this person, but I have looked up this guy's writings, and essentially what he is saying is that racism was invented along with the idea of race by people who were right-wing capitalists, and we should all be globalist communists. This is not a serious historian.
So wait, you're telling me that Benjamin Glasser is colluding with liberals?
He's certainly using them to bolster his arguments. And
this is old news. I mean, these guys are they're just moderate faces for the importation of liberalism into the church. And as you just showed, it's not very well hidden.
No, and they have to use communists, proud, anti-fascist, anti-racist communists as their sources for theological positions. That's not good. But I wanted to talk about the historicity of this. The Greeks believed a Scythian could move to Athens and lose his Scythianness. How did that work out historically? Did that?
What does it even mean?
Yeah. Did
Yeah, if a Canadian moves to America, then he might lose his accent over a few decades.
And his children could blend in. But I mean,
he doesn't become, that's...
Yeah. I mean, Scythians and Greeks are more different than Canadians and Americans. Mm-hmm. But they're both Japhethetic white Europeans. But at the time, there was a huge difference between these groups. And then also, this person seems to forget that Greece and Rome fell to the barbarians. All right, the Roman Empire, which was Greek, fell to the barbarians. Remind me, who were the barbarians? They were these same Scythians. They were the children of these same people that these Greeks believed, oh, well, they can just come in and they'll, magic dirt, they'll just turn into great Romans. They'll turn into Greeks. They'll become just like us. And they didn't. The empire fell because of mass migration of barbarians. So referencing this as the proof that you know everybody before 1970 agreed with Kinnis, quote, race realist, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to use as your example that that's not true, a moment in history where an empire, a decadent empire, at the end of its tenure, imports a bunch of barbarians who overthrow the entire nation and cause it to crumble. Much like the United States and the entire West is doing today, that doesn't seem like a very good argument.
I've got another question for Glazer. Is our friend Audie, his people, his ancestors have lived in sub-Saharan Africa for at least a century. I don't know the full
longer than the United States has been a country.
Okay, so a couple
300 years or so.
Right? Is he a sub-Saharan African? Is he? Because I don't know anymore, right? Like he's physically existed in that space. Did he just soak up the blackness out of the soil?
They've completely lost their Dutchness. They are absolutely no longer Dutch and fully African. I mean, for those who are not aware, the Buddha in South Africa, they landed in the 1600s, right about the same time that the first Anglo-whites were landing in the continent of North America. And they found an empty landscape, empty except for a very few small pockets of tribesmen who are not the predominant races in South Africa today, and the San and Khoisan people. And then through centuries of immigration, these sub-Saharan Africans, Bantu people, came into the already existing South African Buddha nation, which also, because of conflicts of certain colonial powers in Europe, became an English holding at one point and became full of dirty, filthy Englishmen, as Adi, I'm sure, would say. But the English and the Dutch have had a strained relationship at best for the entire time that the English have been there. And people like to say, oh, well, South Africans are racist because they don't like interracial marriage. They don't want their daughters marrying black men. They don't want their daughters marrying Englishmen. Right? Because they have a pride of their own culture and a sense of self. When they landed in South Africa, they did so as Dutch, and they are Dutch to this day. Very different from Nederlanders in Northern Europe, but they are still very much the people who landed there 300 years ago. And for people to come in and say, oh, well, a Scythian can move to Greece and just become a Greek, the entire history of the world cries out against this kind of absolute retardation.
But I don't understand. I thought you said the English went to South Africa, so then they became black, right? Once they moved to the African continent. I mean, everyone, even Augustine is black because he lived on the African continent. I mean, I don't understand the categories that you're using, Jeff. Yeah. They're obviously made up after the Reconquista. How can we? Yeah.
One of my favorite singers of all time is a man named Roger Whittaker, and he was a folk singer in the United States. He went over to Germany and lived out the rest of his life over there, and that's where my parents ran into him, was in Germany, singing German folk music. He had married a German wife, but Roger Whittaker was born in Kenya. Roger Whittaker was born to Englishmen in Kenya, and he remained an Englishman throughout all his days. Now, he loved the nation of Kenya. He would sing songs about how he loved the savannas of Kenya and how he loved the people there, but he was still a white man. To his dying day, he was always a white Englishman, despite the fact that he lived the majority of his life in Kenya, lived some in the United States, and some, lived out the rest of his days in Germany. He didn't become a Kenyan in a racial sense. And it really is absurd to think that could ever happen. And of course, everybody knows that that can't happen because we're talking about a white man in Africa. So now that we've reversed the rules, now that we have turned the table, everyone would agree, well, white people, no matter how long they live in Africa, will never be blacks. They will never be Africans. But if Africans come to England, you know, they're just the new Englishmen. If they come to Ireland, they're just as Irish as you or me. If they come to France, you know, they're the new French generation. They're just as French as anybody else. And that doesn't hold water. It's completely inconsistent. And that inconsistency is the sign of a failed argument, as some might say.
I'd be interested to see if he's deleted the Carl Linnaeus line by now. He probably will after this episode drops, because he really hung a lot on that argument. Like, he deleted whole paragraphs after Audie was like, I never cited that guy. And then suddenly, whoop, there goes a whole section.
Yeah. And that's this section here. Linnaeus originated the division of humanity into 4 races: Asian, yellow, European, white, African, black, and American Indian, red, which is completely got nothing to do with anything that we're talking about here. A guy is talking about races, and he uses a handy, quick, off-the-cuff subdivision of these races. Can
I say one thing? He said in that, this is so funny. He said in that podcast with Presbycast that I was telling you about, he was like, okay, well, even if you don't like know all this theology, you still know red and yellow, black and white, they're all precious in his sight.
Right.
Well, I'm like, well, hang on. Because you're saying,
do you not believe that?
Did Linnaeus write that song? Because that's what you're saying he started, was red and yellow, black and white. So
yeah, and does that mean that Mr. Glazer then is against the use of that song? Does he not believe that red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight? Because I still teach that song to my children, and I think it is a beautiful picture of the gospel, that all people, no matter what color they are, the gospel is for them. Is he really opposed to that? But this use of Linnaeus is completely a non sequitur. It is a red herring, because Linnaeus is not quoted by any of the people that he then names in this paragraph. McAtee, Spangler, Pastor Spangler, have you ever referenced Linnaeus in any of your writing?
No.
All right, so he's and then he says, men like Linnaeus and other Southern Presbyterians use these naturalistic findings to root their arguments in the divisions of race. 18, Robert Louis Dabney, A Defense of Virginia, pages 280 to 281. Now, he does not give us what edition he is using, but I have in my hand Robert Louis Dabney's A Defense of Virginia and the South. And I went to page 280 and 81. And this is the version that almost everybody has, because it is the 2020 release. It is the one that is sold by Amazon and every reputable bookseller. Page 280 to 81 talks about blacks in the South and Southern slavery as it was. It talks about them as being a different type of people, how their races were different, distinct from the whites who ruled over them. Nowhere in this is Linnaeus referenced. And I pointed this out to Sean, and I said, look, I've got the book. I've read the footnote. It's not there. He's making this up. And Sean, you pointed out something. What was the thing that you pointed out when I said that to you?
So when you cite, especially in Chicago, what he did, you just go with that original printing. So either that or a facsimile will have the same page numbers.
Now this is not a facsimile, okay?
Right. So it's possible
that
it's different pages from
close.
that.
It is within 10 pages of the original, so it can't be far. So I read the entire chapter. I'll give you one guess as to who is never referenced in the entire chapter. Linnaeus is never referenced in the entire chapter. And just in case I missed something, here is the original.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah.
Here is the original, page 280 of Defense of Virginia. And you can scroll through this. You will find no reference to Linnaeus. He's not there. He's talking about the transatlantic slave trade, where these people came from, how they got here. Linnaeus is not referenced. The red and yellow, black and white is not referenced. And just in case somehow I was missing it, I went on to what is this website called? Gutenberg. I went on to Gutenberg and I looked up the name Linnaeus, which it has a fully digitized searchable function. Linnaeus is never mentioned. What is more, this entire sentence right here, and let me add that back to the stage so that we can see it. But using the new science of men like Linnaeus and others, Southern Presbyterians use these naturalistic findings to root their arguments in the division of races. I used the search function to search the entire book. The word division shows up exactly one time, and it is talking about the division of labor. This is a farce. This is a lie. This is so stupid. I mean, this is the kind of lie, when you walk into the kitchen and your child is covered in ketchup and you ask him, "Did you get into the ketchup?" And he says, "No." That's how stupid this lie is. We can see through it. We have the original sources. In some cases, we can get them without having to pay an arm and a leg to read them. And the things that you're saying, they say, they do not say. They aren't there. Mr. Glazer, you're making this up. This is whole cloth a lie. This is a fabrication. Dabney did not say the things you're trying to make him say. Why? It baffles the mind. What is he trying to pull off here? What is he trying to achieve with this? And then he says, or did they? Citation number 19. Abner Addison Porter, The Unity of the Human Race, Southern Presbyterian Review 3, number 1, January 1851. I did not read this, but if your entire idea is that, oh, by the way, there were people in Dabney's life who disagreed with him. There were people at his, in his same milieu who held strong disagreements with him. We are aware. We are aware that those people exist. We lost the war. We know that there were enough of you that we lost. Okay, the idea that racial egalitarianism and Unitarianism and the anti-slavers, these people did exist. We're not contesting that. But you referencing somebody who disagreed with these people, allegedly, I have not looked this up. It may be just as farcical as the rest of these citations are. But you referencing someone who allegedly disagrees does not mean that Dabney and these others who are quoted did not say the things they said. That is not proof to the contrary. And then he says, Miles Smith cogently shows that there was no unanimity among Southern divines, especially after the war. And, Darwinism and Race in Gilded Age Southern Presbyterianism by Miles Smith, adfontesjournal.com. The idea that there were people in the South who were against slavery and believed in egalitarianism, the idea that these people existed is not contested. What is contested is that they were theologically sound. And the idea that, people have always held to these beliefs that you are now trying to defrock at best and throw out of the church entirely at worst, people who believed things that great men like Dabney and Thornwell believed.
Yeah, it seems like his argument would. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, okay. So his arguments start, at least in the body of it, is, well, they used Dabney and Thornwell, but they're actually wrong about what those guys believed. And then the evidence is that some people disagreed with Dabney and Thornwell. Well, what did they disagree with? Is Dabney a racist or not? Because your argument is, well, they're wrongly using Dabney, right? But then also, the good thing is a lot of people disagreed with Dabney. Well, I don't know what that means. Like, is Dabney a good guy or a bad guy? Because when I read Defense of Virginia, I know that Glacier's reading that like, oh, every single word of this is awful. This is all anathema. If literally any figure from history came up to him and said what's in Defense of Virginia to his face, he would burst into flames. It's just, I don't understand this argument. I mean, he said it's not written with AI, so obviously it came from his mind or one of the other brilliant scholars that put this together. But yeah, go on. I just had to rant about that for a second.
Yeah. Any commentary from you, Pastor Pastor Glacier, Pastor Spangler?
Yes, no, I appreciate that. It's a good point, Sean. I would just say he's exaggerating too the differences between these old Southerners.
Mm-hmm.
I can say with pretty high confidence that not a single one of these men, no matter what his particular disagreement with Dabney, none of them would dare let a black man touch their white daughter.
Yeah, and the idea that these people who had disagreements, public disagreements with Dabney at the time, that they would be absolutely on board with everything that Glaser is advocating and everything that the world advocates right now, it doesn't wash. We know that they would not have been fond of this. I mean, Abraham Lincoln is hailed as some sort of anti-racist hero by the right and the left. And he, as a senator in Illinois, was not only a voter for a document, but a not just someone who voted in the Senate for the passing of a particular law, but one of the authors of a law that forbade blacks from living in Illinois at all. So, yeah, this guy who is against slavery, he wanted to set the blacks free. I mean, he quite famously wanted to send them all back to Africa because he believed that we were not compatible, that we could not live together. Whereas in the South, they believe perfectly fine for us to live together. We just have to do so within a law that sets rules and regulations about how we interact with each other. So no, even the people that opposed Dabney in his time would not have been in agreement with Glaser and the modern denominations that want to hold to these new, very new and novel ideas about race that are being touted by this page. I think this last paragraph is very interesting. While contemporary defenders and proponents of kinism and race realism like to use the Southern Presbyterians and others to give supposed historical credentials to their views, it is simply not the case that the tradition bears this out. Citation needed. Take their oft-made citation of J. Gresham Machen, for example. Michael Hunter likes to point out Machen wrote to his mother while a student at Princeton and claims J. Gresham Machen was opposed to interracial marriage, and there's a citation, and proves no support for such other than associating him with others who did.
That's crazy. Even if Hunter didn't do that in his article, we have the words of Machen to his mother in which he's complaining that they're letting black students to come to Princeton.
Yes. I mean, this, again, citation needed. He did not cite this idea, but the idea that Machen, are you really positing that J. Gresham Machen would be on board with racial egalitarianism as it is being put forward by this denomination and others.
He reported having heated disagreements with his professor Warfield on this very matter.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he says the historical, what is it? He says, it is simply not the case that the tradition bears this out. You do know that we know how to read, right? We can actually find the things that Machen said. We can find the things that Dabney said. Their writings are not locked behind a vault where only the academics can get their hands on them. We are able to get our hands on these things, and it simply is true that Machen was opposed to interracial marriage. It simply is true that he was for segregation. And the fact that you are not citing his work anywhere where he says that he's not, I think is very suspicious. You are making a bold and bald statement that J. Gresham Machen was not against interracial marriage and segregation with no citation. You even reference somebody who used a citation and then just refused to interact with the material. This is not legitimate. This is not scholarly. This is not honest. This is beyond dishonest to the point of stupidity.
He's purposely hiding behind that. He's purposely doing it this way without actual quotes from what he's talking about, because he knows that if you look at the quotes, it doesn't support what he's saying. Like I had said this from the beginning, that this reminds me of, this is back when I used to listen to The Dividing Line. There was some guy that was trying to make an argument about Augustine, that it was like his doctoral dissertation. And James White went and literally bought copies of some of the books that were referenced just to look at this one reference on the page, so he could say, where's it at? What are you talking about? You didn't quote anything. You just said, Augustine believes this. And then you put a footnote to a book that is referencing Augustine, but it doesn't say anything. Like, you didn't even take a quote from that. And so that would be, I get that is my challenge to whoever is in charge in the ARP. Actually, if you're listening to this and you're just trying to quote mine and bash us, I would like to see you find the quotes that he's saying are there. Because even if you agree with the idea that he's trying to put forward, you should have enough integrity to be able to say, well, no, that doesn't actually say that. We don't actually have guys like Machen in our corner. Go ahead and show some actual quotes instead of this idea exists. Here's a citation. And then you go to citation. That's not even making an argument. That's what kills me with this. It's like that thing that people will do on social media where they're like, well, you could do the reading. Well, it's like, well, I don't have to read an entire book and then construct your argument in my head in order to get the argument. Put the quotes forward, make the argument, and then I could actually have something to interact with.
Yeah, and again, it's very shoddy work. I mean, we have now the final sentence in this paragraph. For instance, Retuskia notes that in latter years, Machen was active in, quote, Machen was active in political organizations that worked to repeal segregation laws, end quote, and, quote, Machen had come to believe the gospel was the only protection against such racism, end quote. Citation needed. What is with the hit and miss citations going on here? Who is Retuskia? Why should we believe him about what Machen did and believed? And why is there no citation? That's the thing that's so bizarre here, is the citations are all over the place. Some of them exist, some of them don't, some of them go to false places, some of them go to pages that do not say the things you purport they say, sometimes you say things with no citations that are flatly wrong. And now you're quoting some guy named Rituskia, who I'll admit I am not a historian of American Presbyterianism in the 18 and early 1900s, but there's no citation here. We have no idea who this guy is, at least I don't. And you're providing quotes about Machen with no citation from some guy I've never heard of in order to completely remove everything that Machen actually wrote down himself, the things he said about what he believed in his own life. This doesn't wash. This is not appropriate. This is not scholarly. This is laughable. You should be laughed out of your church and your denomination for ever letting something like this reach the light of day.
I said this when we talked with Audie, that if Restuccia is quoted somewhere earlier, he needs a footnote that says ibid. I forget what that stands for. It's like a Latin phrase, but it essentially means where I quoted, this guy's name, like, go back to that source. So you could do that where you don't have to put the entire source every single time, but you would still have to put something like Restuccia, ibid, the page numbers that you got this from, even if you use the page numbers before. I mean, we don't even know what article this is from. I found a guy with this last name who pastors in Princeton, New Jersey. So that I'm guessing that's the guy. He's got a vested interest in the goings on of Princeton. He's got a lot of articles, and it looked like one book. It was on Crossway. Crossway has a author bio thing. So maybe that's the guy. I don't know. Maybe it's this guy's son. Maybe it's his grandfather. Who knows?
Yeah, and this does look to be one of the references, or this paragraph here looks to be one of the paragraphs that was just completely deleted out of the following versions. This reference to Restuccia and Machen. So for all we know, this is another AI hallucination, because this seemingly in one of the other versions I have, this paragraph or this sentence does not appear. The name Restuccia does not appear at all in another version of this document that I have. And I don't know why. He seems to be making a very strong point that Machen was not in agreement with these positions. Therefore, we can excommunicate you. I mean, that's a very strong position to take. We can excommunicate you because Machen and Dabney did not believe the things that you believe. Restuccia says so. No citation, and then later we deleted that. So this is, it's so tiresome. It's just absolutely tiresome. We are 9 pages into this 30-page report, and all we're finding is false citations that do not support your statements. At times, you are citing communist left-wing academics to support your views, ahistorical ideas, and then you're referencing people that we have no idea who they are, and we have no references to them in the footnotes.
Yeah. Not referencing at all.
Mm-hmm.
Where you should have a reference, because you just said a person's name and he said something, and you've got no address for that. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know who that is. It's just a last name. Ostensibly, more than one person has that last name, right?
Probably, almost certainly, if he had a dad, if he had children. But we're kind of running out of time, and I thank you, Pastor Spangler, for spending so much time with us.
Oh, that
tonight.
might be it right there. That Nathan Restuccia. Well, that's a different guy than what I had found online. Did you find
Fundamentalism in Black and White, November of 2022, adfontesjournal.com. But that is referenced where? I mean,
in the middle of that
in the middle up here.
He's got it above where it even says, yeah.
So he's talking about the letter that Machen wrote. And so his entire article seems to be on the idea that he wrote this one letter, people are using this letter, but actually he didn't really hold to that. But anyway,
so it does appear that he cites Restuccia in the previous sentence.
Yeah, so maybe this is just sloppy writing. This should have been at the end. But I mean, I've not read Fundamentalism in Black and White, but this is published in 2022. And we're supposed to be taking a guy who wrote a paper 4 years ago as an authority on Machen. Whatever happened to Ad Fontes? We have, like I said before, we have Machen's original writings. We can go to his original writings. We don't have to take a modern academic's perspective on what Machen believed. We can read Machen for ourselves. But got one last paragraph that I want to hit here, and this is having to do with the concept of chattel slavery. And there's a little bit more in here about a Dutchman and how he's opposed to the segregation found in the South. Not sure why that's relevant. None of us, I believe, were referencing this guy. But we'll move on to one other avenue of the discussion has to do with the related matter of chattel slavery. So this is a hot topic right now, and we will be discussing this in a future episode, which to you, dear listener, this will not be a future episode, but it will be our previous episode. But he says one other avenue of discussion has to do with the related matter of chattel slavery. The Kinist race realist attempts to show that the Westminster Assembly was in favor, if not at least quiet, about the matter. And he references Hunter answering ecclesiastical clerics, which that is not a proper footnote right there. But yet there were those present who saw slavery as sinful. And the citation there is to the Westminster Assembly, annotations upon all the books of the Old and New Testament. So some of the people present saw slavery as being sinful per se. Take this from Samuel Rutherford as proof. Quote, a man being created according to God's image, he is res sacra, a sacred thing, and can no more by nature's law be sold and bought than a religious and sacred thing dedicated to God, end quote. So here we have an actual quote from somebody at the time who is opposed to slavery, not chattel slavery, any kind of slavery. All right. Men cannot be bought and sold because they have the image of God. They are res sacra. And then he says there are other contemporaries of Rutherford who would agree with this understanding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, from a particularly from a racial point of view. And this is something I want to get to, which is, okay, some people believed this, but how do they square that with the Bible? People can no more be sold and bought than a religious and sacred thing dedicated to God. I would like to see that argument made, since the Old Testament is full of not only examples of people being bought and sold, but rules about how that is to be done. It is not just the Old Testament either. The New Testament book of Philemon is about a man who is a slave, who is the property of another person, belongs to him. Philemon, the slave, bears the image of God. At no point does Paul say that he doesn't. And at no point does Paul say, hey, by the way, you need to let go your slave. Actually, I believe Philemon was the name of the owner of the slave, not the slave himself. And At no point does Paul say, hey, you need to let this man go because he has the image of God. At no point does he say you need to set him free because he has now become a Christian. He sends him back to his owner. He sends a slave back into slavery and says, accept him as a brother in Christ. He does not say you cannot buy and sell him. He does not say, race-based slavery is bad. Slavery is bad. He does not bring into this argumentation the image of God or res sacra, a sacred thing. At no point does Paul make these arguments. So I'm very curious. You've cited this historical guy who held this position. We're willing to grant that. But you can't just cite him and say, okay, some people were opposed to this. We've got people who were not opposed to it. All you're doing is you're saying, okay, there were people who disagreed. We accept that. We accept the disagreement. You are the man who does not accept the disagreement because you are the man saying that if you hold these views, then you are outside the church. We are not the ones making that claim. At no point did we say if you are opposed to slavery or you believe that slavery is morally repugnant, that you are not a Christian. We'll say that you are logically incoherent. We'll say that you are not following the scriptures. But we're not trying to throw you out of a church for holding to these beliefs. We are not saying that this is an ahistorical position. You, sir, are the one making these arguments, and you can't do so by simply pointing to the fact that some people believe things contrary to that position at some point in the past. That is not an argument. That is not coherent. Thoughts?
I was hoping Pastor Spangler was going to jump in a little on that one.
I don't have anything more to add except to recommend that book you showed us earlier. Defense of Virginia, which is the best collection of arguments that I know of for exactly what you were saying, that slavery is not a sin.
Yeah, and you can find this on Amazon. You can have it shipped to your door in 24 hours, and you can get it, and you can flip to pages 280 and 81 and see that there's no reference to Linnaeus, that there's no reference to secular humanism. This is a man who is steeped in Scripture, a man of the Southern tradition, a man who believed that chattel slavery was not only allowable, but a commendable practice in the South. And for Glazer and whoever it was that compiled this paper with him to reference this book falsely in ways that do not make sense and to try to purport that they say things they do not say, that is dishonest. And bringing up people who were opposed to Dabney in his day, we are aware that Dabney was not a popular man in his lifetime. He's not a popular man today, but he was right. And you can't always be right and popular. Sometimes those things are at odds.
I do want to say that the issue of slavery, the whole discussion, is completely separate from the discussion on race. You can have some overlap, but the idea that, let's just throw in there real quick that God made a temporary break in his moral law and allowed for slavery to exist for this short amount of time, right? Like they treat slavery like it was part of the positive law, like it wasn't. I mean, slavery is so ingrained in God's moral law. It's in the 10th commandment. One of the things you can't covet is your neighbor's slave. It was hilarious seeing the arguments, because there was a whole other statement that came out, I think this week, or like the preliminary parts of it or something like that, came out of which Presbyterian denomination was that? It wasn't the ARP again, was it?
PCA.
It was the PCA. Okay.
The Report on Christian Nationalism.
Right. Yeah. They were trying to say like that basically like slavery was now that we're in the Christian era, like slavery doesn't work, whatever. So their argument, they were trying to say like slavery is against Westminster. That was like that's where they were trying to get to. And I've shown people from Luther's larger catechism, I think it might be in the small catechism as well, when he talks about that command, I don't remember if it's 9th or 10th. I think it might be 10th as well. He's saying that to try to get your neighbor's slave to not do his duty is a violation of that commandment. So their whole thing was like, well, the South having slavery is against Westminster. I would say, well, the North ending slavery is against my confession of faith. So I guess we just got to go back to the good old Bible, right? I mean, I'm not saying that that's actually true that slavery is against Westminster, but it's just a hilarious situation that they've put themselves in, where we have to anathematize slavery, which is very clearly on both sides of the advent of Christ. It is positively talked about. You had mentioned Philemon, kind of a wild thing to include in the biblical canon, a letter where Paul is like, hey, can we talk about your slave? And not like, tisk, tisk, don't be having slaves. It's just it's insane. What can you say?
Yeah, and guys, if you haven't read Philemon, do so. Because Paul talks about sin in the context of slavery, in the context of a runaway slave who stole some jewels and ran away from his owner. And Paul is making the argument that the slave is completely in the wrong. And he says, you as a Christian should forgive him and accept him back into your household. Not you should, let him go, not he was fully in his rights to do this, not you shouldn't own slaves, but he was wrong for having run away. Now he's a Christian and he's coming back. Accept him back in Christian charity. That's completely contrary to what this assembly in their general assembly they're finding against Christian nationalism. Their little blurb about slavery, it's completely contrary to that, and it's completely contrary to this quote from Samuel Rutherford, where he says a man is a sacred thing who cannot be bought and sold. That is contrary to what Paul said. That is contrary to what the Old Testament said. And like Sean, like you've said several times on Twitter, posting again and again, just over and over again, God does not allow for a temporary lapse in his moral law. God does not do that. And
I want to give proper credit. That is a Dabney argument in defense of Virginia, that he mentions, if God ever allowed it, if God ever said this is a good thing or this is an allowable thing ever, then that means it is always so it's the opposite of positive law, right? Where you would have something like shellfish, right? Obviously, at a later date, Christians are allowed to eat shellfish. So shellfish is not a part of the core moral law that forever governs. Even outside of the written law, there is God's moral law. So God never defies that, the law that is embedded in creation, in the and in the I'm looking for the best. It's embedded in God himself. Like it's an outpouring of who God is, this moral law. So it's so insane that essentially is their argument, that yes, slavery is against God's moral law. He allowed for a time, for a dispensation, he allowed that slavery could exist, But now we are in a different dispensation, and we have a different moral law now, I guess. I don't know what their answer to that would be, because when I talk to guys like John Reesner, who basically anytime that you just, hey man, this doesn't make sense, here's a short little argument. I do the reading. I can't be bothered to deal with this. I have other things to do. But he'll just pump out all day just little pot shots. So I don't know what to do with that. Apparently, I'm not doing enough reading to understand his argument. But, oh well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is, unfortunately, I think this paper is not coherent. It sets out to do a thing, and it does not have the structural underpinning in order to get that done. It makes points that it does not support, and it uses references that do not support its statements. It sometimes fabricates references, and sometimes it references people who are a bit suspect in order to support the things that they are trying to get across. And we'll probably do a few more shows on this paper, because it really is a microcosm of the modern problem. But before we close, Pastor Spangler, we wanted to have a moment just for you. And we've done this with Schlebusch and with Pastor McAtee, where we gave them a moment to lay out what is it that they believe, what are their particular positions. And I want to say just at the outset, okay, like Sean was saying before, we don't necessarily agree with everything Pastor Spangler believes, and he doesn't necessarily agree with everything we believe. I'm a Baptist. Sean is a Lutheran. Spangler is a Presbyterian. But we all appreciate Dabney. We all appreciate Thornwell. And the reason is because we appreciate the Christian tradition, and we hold to the scriptures. And that is our unification. That is the thing that binds us together as brothers. So, Pastor Spangler,
I did want to give one little.
Go ahead.
Thunder going. I did want to give one little caveat. So, when we give you the mic, kind of think of somebody just read this statement. They're all hyped up on social justice juice, and they're looking to throw a pitchfork right at you. So, what would your response to that person be? That's kind of the context I wanted to give for.
Yeah, just Pastor Spangler, having read this paper, having thoughts on it. If somebody came to you and says, "Hey, what is your response to this? What do you actually believe?" Give us a couple minutes just of your telling of your own idea. What is your position? Positively, what is it that you believe, and how would you like people to understand your position?
Give them the full screen, Jeff.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, let me do that.
The best way I can summarize it is, I'm content with God. God made all men of one blood, but he divided them into the separate nations. And I'm pleased with his work of providence to make us distinct. The liberals speak of diversity, but I truly love diversity that God had made, and I don't want to see it dissolved into a brown mass. And people who do today, they're simply not content with God. They rage against the Creator, and thus they rage against the creation, his beautiful handiwork. And I want to preserve what is good and right. I also want, in obedience to God, to honor my father and my mother and my father's fathers and my whole race, according to the fifth commandment. This is good and right. I also want to honor natural affection, by which people who are bound to us with more bonds are owed more of our duties. And we have strong bonds of blood to our race and nation. And we ought to honor those bonds by special loyalty and love. The principle that Paul explains in 1 Timothy 5:8, that any man who does not care for his own household is worse than an infidel. Because even infidels understand this. They have loyalty to their own people, they have love for their own. This is simple, basic morality. And the modern world and its egalitarian leveling of all these beautiful distinctions God has made ultimately dishonor him and keep us from obeying him. But I'm resolved, by the Lord's grace, Christ helping me, to honor God and to obey him. And I call everyone else to do the same.
All right. Well, we really appreciate the time that you've cut out. I mean, we know that you are a pastor, which means we are recording this on a Saturday night, and tomorrow is going to be a busy day for you. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come by and look through this with us, and especially to lay out your own positions, especially since you were referenced so thoroughly in this paper. And for those of you who are interested in Pastor Spangler's ideas, his positions, there will be links to his writings below. He has written blogs, he has written books. And if you want to know what somebody believes, if you want to know what they actually are trying to support, what they want to inculcate into their audience, the best way to do that is to go to the source. Getting it secondhand from a podcast, even this podcast, or secondhand from a report, especially one that is as shoddily put together as the one that we're looking at today. This is subpar. We live in the internet age. You can get access to so many wonderful original sources. You don't have to go, halfway across a continent to one particular cloister where one monk has one copy of a document in order to just discover that it says the exact same thing as the document that you have back at home. And, we have the ability to get on Google, look up somebody's name, find what they wrote, buy their books, and you don't have to trust every Tom, Dick, and Harry you find on Twitter, which as much as I would appreciate you following on Twitter, you subscribing to the show, you sharing this with your friends, really what actually matters is the Bible. What does the Bible say? And the people who teach the Bible, how did they go about defending their positions? What are the things that they said about the way that they understood those scriptures to be applied in their life and times? Those things are accessible. Don't be afraid. Do not be scared by academics who try to tell you that you need to have a degree to understand things. You can read Plato. College students do this every day. And not all of them are very bright. And they're still able to get an education. They're still able to understand it. Dabney is not dense. He is not hard to get through. He is not a slog. Some writers are like that. He is not. You can understand him. You can share him with your 12-year-old kid, and he will be able to understand all of the arguments that are being laid out. The Westminster Divines, sometimes their writing was very long and arduous because they were trying to lay out a very airtight argument. But if you take the time, you can get through it. Read your confessions. If you are in a confessional church, if you are Presbyterian, Lutheran, 1689, whatever your position, whatever church you go to, get a copy of your confession of faith and read through it. If you're struggling with that, listen to it on audio, maybe get a commentary, maybe get one of the older commentaries because the newer ones aren't necessarily very helpful. But these things are approachable. You as a man are able to understand the thoughts of the men who came before you. They wrote them down to be understood. They're not like a lot of modern philosophers and modern writers who are simply being flowery and obtuse in order to seem more intelligent than they are. These are people who cared about the things that they believed, and they wrote them down in a way to be understood. Pastor Spangler is the same way. He wants you to understand the things that he is trying to teach you. He's not doing this out of some vainglorious ideal of making himself out to be some highly intellectual, better than you kind of, educated man that, oh, the boy who pulls the plow can't know what I know. He wants the boy who pulls the plow to know the scriptures better than any monk ever could, because that is our tradition. We want the scripture to go to the common man. We want every man to be able to access these truths, to be able to understand them, and to share them to the future generations that they are raising in their own households. So with that said, Pastor Spangler, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us as we eviscerate this unfortunate document. And we appreciate the work that you're doing, writing for the Pactum Institute, writing your own blog, and writing your books. We will continue to support that effort, because at the end of the day, we are brothers. We are Christians. And where we might have disagreements, they are tertiary to the fact that we are brothers in Christ, and we need to extend the hand of fellowship to each other. And we need to be kind, even in our disagreements. So with that said, Pastor Spangler, we really appreciate you coming on. And to those of you who are watching this, we hope that this has been helpful to you. We hope that you will read this document for yourself. Read through the paper. Don't just take my word for it. Look at the citations. The citations, they got some problems. And this thing should not be adopted as it is, even with the edits that are going on. This is not good. And this is the complete and total intention of this paper is to be used to besmirch the character of good Christian men who hold to good Christian traditional positions. And it's one thing to say I disagree with that. It's another thing entirely to say that because I disagree with you, you should be thrown out of the church. And with that said, we hope that you have a wonderful night. Do the reading, do your homework, and have a good day. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever it is God finds you, God has put good work for you to do in your life. Meet that responsibility. Be the man that God wants you to be. And don't be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Pursue the truth and obey God. So with that being said, folks, we appreciate you spending the time watching this. We hope this has been beneficial to you, and have a wonderful day. Farewell.